You're no longer needed here, Vera. Security will escort you out. Daniel Hart didn't lower his voice. He wanted every single person in that room to hear it. 15 CEOs sat around the table. Tokyo, Zurich, Dubai, Singapore, Toronto, São Paulo. They had flown across time zones for this moment. Pens were already uncapped, contracts neatly aligned. We were less than 20 minutes away from finalizing a $2.1 billion deal. And this 36-year-old CEO, barely a year into the role, chose now to fire me. My name is Vera Collins. I'm 49 years old. I've spent 2 decades building Orion Strategic Holdings international partnerships, from nothing into something that could command a room like this. And now I was being erased. Publicly. I felt it hit me sharp sudden, but I didn't move. I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, I looked across the table. Kenji Watanabe, CEO from Tokyo, met my eyes. Just for a second. He gave the slightest nod. Not sympathy. Recognition. He understood something Daniel didn't. 20 years. That's what I gave this company. Years of overnight flights, missed holidays deals stitched together in quiet corners of hotel lounges while the world slept. Trust built slowly, carefully, never rushed. And right now, Daniel thought he had just taken everything from me. What he didn't know was that I saw this moment coming months ago. And the trap I built, he had just stepped straight into it. Before we continue, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Every small action you take helps meaningful stories reach more people, and in doing so, you become someone who quietly spreads value and inspiration to others. I'd also love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? And just so you know, this is a fictional story. It's inspired by real-life experiences and professional situations, with certain elements enhanced using AI to make it more vivid and engaging. I hope it leaves a lasting impression and gives you a story worth thinking about. The words still echoed in the room, but my mind had already drifted somewhere else. Not to the embarrassment, not even to the anger, but to everything it had taken to stand in that room in the first place. 20 years. That number isn't just time. It's a collection of sacrifices that don't show up on any balance sheet. I missed my daughter's first stage performance because I was closing a deal in Frankfurt no one else could salvage. She didn't speak to me properly for months after that. I told myself it was temporary, that she would understand someday. I'm still not sure she ever did. 3 years ago, my husband passed away after a long illness. I was in Singapore negotiating a joint venture when the call came in. By the time I got on a plane, it was already too late. There are moments in life you don't get back, no matter how successful you become. And yet, I stayed. Because what I built wasn't just contracts, it was trust. I learned languages not because it looked impressive, but because it mattered. Enough Mandarin to remove the need for interpreters in sensitive negotiations. Enough German to catch the subtle differences between obligation and intent. Enough cultural nuance to know when silence meant hesitation and when it meant respect. Deals like this don't happen in boardrooms alone. They happen over long dinners, where no one is checking the time. Early morning walks, where the real concerns finally surface. Quiet conversations where people decide whether they trust you, not just your company. That trust doesn't come from titles or presentations. It comes from showing up again and again, until people stop seeing you as a negotiator and start seeing you as someone who keeps their word. And everyone in that room knew exactly who had done that work. Daniel Hart was everything I wasn't. Where I listened, he performed. Where I prepared for problems, he prepared for applause. He spoke in sharp phrases that sounded impressive in investor briefings, but meant very little when a deal actually started to fracture. I had heard him once late in the hallway outside the executive offices. He didn't know I was there. He was talking to someone from the board, his voice confident, almost casual. We need digital native leadership, someone who represents where the market is going. I didn't need clarification. I understood the translation perfectly. Too old, too slow, too invisible. In his world, 20 years of relationship building couldn't compete with a polished presentation or a strong online presence. Experience didn't scale the way attention did, and Daniel was very good at attracting attention. He used phrases like forward-facing leadership and brand-aligned executives. He talked about disruption as if it were a strategy instead of a consequence. To him, breaking what already worked was proof of progress. What he didn't understand was that some systems don't break loudly. They collapse quietly, starting with the smallest cracks in trust. Today wasn't just a meeting, it was a stage. He had chosen it carefully. 15 CEOs, 9 time zones, billions on the table, assistants lined along the walls, legal teams ready, every detail designed for impact. This wasn't just about removing me. It was about replacing me in front of the people who had trusted me for years. I glanced at the head of the table. My seat was no longer mine. Daniel's leather portfolio was already there, open-positioned, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. He hadn't just planned this. He had rehearsed it. The realization didn't burn the way I expected. It settled into something colder, something steady, because if he had been preparing his performance for weeks, then he had no idea how long I had been preparing mine. I didn't react when it started. Not the first time he tested the language, not the second, not even the third. You learn after enough years in rooms like this that the loudest move isn't always the smartest one. The first hint came 6 months ago over coffee in the executive lounge. Daniel dropped the phrase next generation leadership into an otherwise ordinary conversation. He watched me carefully after he said it, like he was measuring how far he could push. I simply nodded, took a sip, and let the silence do the work. The second time was during a budget review. "We need executives who are more visible," he said, gesturing toward a slide filled with metrics that had nothing to do with closing deals. No one challenged him. No one ever does when the narrative sounds modern enough. By the third time, it wasn't subtle anymore. "Investors are looking for younger leadership profiles," he said in a room full of people who suddenly found their laptops very interesting. That's when I knew. Not suspected. Not worried. Knew. In this industry, changes like that don't happen overnight. They build quietly behind closed doors, dressed up as strategy, until they become decisions. And decisions once made rarely reverse themselves. What I didn't expect was the timing. Daniel didn't want a clean transition. He didn't want a quiet announcement in an internal memo. He wanted something visible, something memorable. And he chose today. The biggest negotiation this company had ever hosted. 15 CEOs in one room. Months of groundwork leading to a single moment. 20 minutes before the meeting, my phone buzzed. A message from Elena Cruz, one of the few assistants I trusted. He brought her. She's waiting outside. I didn't need to ask who. A replacement doesn't stand in the hallway unless the decision has already been made. I stared at the message for a few seconds, then locked my screen. No reaction, no hesitation, just confirmation. Everything was unfolding exactly on schedule. There was one more message I never should have seen. 3 weeks earlier, an internal email had landed in my inbox by mistake. Daniel had copied me without realizing it. Most people would have ignored it, skimmed past it, deleted it without a second thought. I didn't. The subject line was simple, almost harmless leadership transition capture, Astor event. But the body told a different story. It outlined camera placement, angles, timing, where the photographer should stand to capture the moment of transition as the new lead stepped into position. It even specified the expression they wanted, composed, confident, forward-looking, and the old lead not named, just implied. Me. I read it twice, then saved it. Not out of fear, not even out of anger, out of certainty. That was the moment everything became clear. This wasn't about performance or strategy or even results. It was about optics, a narrative, a carefully staged shift designed to look decisive and visionary. For a brief moment, I'll admit I felt it. That quiet, hollow weight that comes when you realize something is already in motion and you can't stop it. But that feeling didn't last. Because underneath it was something steadier, colder, understanding. If he wanted a stage, I would give him one. just not the ending he expected. 6 months earlier, long before any of this became visible, I had been reviewing the early drafts of this deal. Late night, empty office, the kind of silence where details become impossible to ignore. I kept thinking about one thing. What happens when the person holding the trust disappears before the deal is finished? I had seen it before. Deals collapsing overnight because the relationship holding them together was suddenly gone. Months of negotiation undone in hours. So I made a decision. I added a clause. Simple, clean, easy to overlook if you didn't know what to look for, but impossible to ignore once it mattered. And every single person in that room had already agreed to it. If you believe I was right to stay calm, prepare quietly, and protect the deal instead of reacting emotionally in that moment, then let me know. Just leave a 1 in the comments so I know you would have made the same choice. I didn't present it as protection for myself. That would have raised questions I couldn't afford. Instead, I framed it as protection for them. When I spoke with Kenji Watanabe, I chose my words carefully, explaining how continuity ensured respect for the time his team had already invested. With Matthias Kruger from Zurich, I focused on risk control precision and the cost of disruption across jurisdictions. In Dubai, I spoke about stability. In Singapore, I emphasized long-term alignment. Same clause, different language. Because trust isn't built by repeating the same sentence. It's built by understanding what matters to the person sitting across from you. The clause itself was simple. If the principal liaison named in the agreement was removed or replaced before final signing, all memorandums of understanding would be immediately void. Void, not delayed, not renegotiated. Gone. Buried in the 9th section, under mutual obligations, it didn't stand out. It wasn't supposed to. It read like a safeguard, not a trigger. Every single CEO in that room had reviewed it. Some saw it as a layer of protection against internal instability. Others recognized the leverage it quietly created. A few understood exactly what it could become, and they signed anyway. Daniel never questioned it. He approved the drafts without reading past the executive summary, too focused on presentation decks, press narratives, and the story he wanted to tell once the deal closed. That was his pattern. He focused on what was visible. I focused on what was binding. Weeks later, after one of our calls, Kenji had lingered just a moment longer than usual. His voice lowered slightly, almost private. If they remove you, he said, we walk away. No hesitation, no negotiation, just certainty. That's not influence you announce. That's influence you earn. There was another layer Daniel never saw. The documents on the table looked complete. Thick, polished, ready for signatures. Every page aligned, every clause reviewed, every CEO prepared to finalize. But they weren't finished. Not yet. What sat in front of them were structured drafts binding in appearance, but not in execution. The final step required authentication. A single encrypted signature that validated the entire agreement across jurisdictions. Mine. That signature wasn't stored on any company server. It never had been. After a near disaster 3 years ago, I worked with our legal counsel to redesign the process. We needed something that couldn't be forged, duplicated, or accessed without direct authorization. So we built a system. A secure hardware token. Compact. Unremarkable. Easy to overlook unless you knew exactly what it was. It stayed with me at all times. Every deal, every country, every closing. Once activated, it would authenticate the final contract with a timestamp that couldn't be altered. Without it, the agreement remained incomplete. Legally suspended. If anyone tried to bypass it, the system would trigger alerts, internal and external. Legal teams would be notified instantly. The process would freeze. Daniel inherited that system when he took over. He never asked how it worked. He never needed to. From his perspective, deals closed because they were announced, because the room applauded, because the headline was already written. But systems like this don't respond to confidence. They respond to authorization. As I stood there, briefcase in hand, I could feel the weight of that small device resting inside. Not heavy in size, but in consequence. Daniel believed removing me had stripped away my authority. What he didn't realize was that the final step had never been his to control. I stepped away from the table without saying a word. No argument, no resistance. Just a quiet movement chair sliding back into place, as if nothing significant had happened. But in rooms like that, silence carries weight. I felt it immediately. The energy shifted, subtle but undeniable. Pens that had hovered over signature lines lowered onto the table. Documents that had been spread open were slowly gathered, aligned and closed. Eyes moved not toward Daniel, but toward each other. Quick glances, silent questions, instant calculations. Daniel didn't see it, or maybe he did, but misunderstood it. He straightened his posture, stepped into my seat, and placed both hands on the table like someone claiming ground he believed was already his. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice firm, rehearsed. He began speaking, moving through prepared remarks about growth projections, shared vision, strategic alignment. The kind of language that fills space but doesn't build confidence. Momentum is a fragile thing. It doesn't survive on words alone. It survives on trust. And the trust in that room had just shifted with me. A voice broke the rhythm. Lars Nystrom, from Stockholm, leaned back slightly, his expression composed. "Could you clarify Clause 17? The question landed cleanly. Clause 17 wasn't just another section. It was the structural core that balanced obligations across multiple jurisdictions. I had negotiated it line by line, defended every word through months of revisions. Daniel hadn't been part of those conversations. I watched his eyes flicker across the page, scanning, searching for something familiar. "Well," he began, "Clause 17 addresses." He didn't finish. Matthias Kruger leaned forward, his tone precise. "Without Vera, who ensures its execution." It wasn't curiosity. It was a verdict waiting to be spoken. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. It tightened. You could feel it in the way chairs stopped shifting, in the way no one reached for their pens again. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with decisions being made in real time. Daniel tried to recover. He flipped through the pages too quickly, words coming out sharper, faster, as if speed could replace understanding. "We can ensure continuity," he said. "Our team is fully aligned." No one responded. At the far end of the table, Amélie Laurent from Paris closed her folder with a soft, deliberate motion. The sound was quiet, but in a room like that, it carried. Beside her, Rafael Costa capped his pen and placed it neatly on top of his documents. Not a random gesture, a signal. Two interpreters near the wall exchanged a glance, then began gathering their headsets. One of the legal aides followed, already stepping toward the door. Daniel kept talking, but the room had already stopped listening. Lars was the first to move. He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket with calm precision. The faint scrape of his chair against the marble floor cut through everything. In negotiations like this, that sound only means one thing: finality. He looked directly at Daniel, his voice even almost detached. "As stated in the agreement, without the designated liaison, our memorandum is void. Not negotiable, not emotional, just fact." For a moment, Daniel didn't react. It was as if he believed he could still redirect the outcome, pull it back, with the right combination of words. "We can still move forward," he said quickly. "We have alignment on the key terms," but Lars had already picked up his briefcase. And once one person stands, the rest rarely stay seated. I was halfway down the marble hallway when Daniel's voice finally broke behind me. Sharp, uncontrolled. "Get legal on the line, now." I didn't turn around. I slowed my steps slightly, just enough to let the echoes reach me through the partially open doors. A chair scraped. Someone fumbled with a speakerphone. Then the voice of our chief legal officer came through, steady, precise. "Without the designated liaison present, at final signing clause, 9 renders all memorandums void." A pause. "And without her encrypted authorization, the contracts cannot be validated." Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating. "We'll override it," Daniel said, but the certainty was gone. "You can't," came the reply. "Any attempt to bypass the system will trigger external legal alerts. The agreements are no longer executable. Another pause. Longer this time. I imagined him standing there, staring at the same message I had already pictured in my mind. Final signature missing. Contract invalid. An assistant rushed past me, whispering urgently into her phone. Fragments of panic floated through the air. Oslo has already informed their board. They're withdrawing completely. Perfect. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, pressing the button without hesitation. As they closed, Daniel's voice was still trying to hold something together that had already fallen apart. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Clear. I walked down the steps slowly, letting the moment settle. Then my phone rang. Kenji. We would like you to continue, he said calmly. Not as part of your company. As an independent lead, full authority. I smiled slightly. Understood. Before I could even put my phone away, another message came in. Then another. Zurich, Singapore. A major investor who had been hesitating for months. All the same condition. Only if I was leading. 3 months later, I signed a new agreement. $2.8 billion. Larger than the one that collapsed. My own firm. My own terms. Daniel lost a deal. I built something bigger. Because in the end, it was never about the position. It was about the trust he thought he could replace. There are moments in life when everything you've built seems to disappear in seconds, and in those moments, what truly matters is not what you lose, but what still remains within you. I didn't win because I fought back louder, or because I proved someone wrong in the room. I won because I had spent years doing the quiet work no one applauds, building trust, keeping my word, and preparing even when no one was watching. That's something no title, no position, and no sudden decision can take away. What stayed with me most wasn't the deal or the outcome, but the realization that real value is never as fragile as it seems. It lives in how people remember you, how they choose you when it matters, and how they stand with you even when you're no longer in the room. If you were in that situation, would you react in the moment, or prepare long before it ever happened? If this story made you pause even for a second, then you're already part of something meaningful. A simple, like a comment or a subscription from you, doesn't just support this channel, it helps these stories reach someone who might need them at the exact right time. And sometimes that small action can shift how someone sees their own path.